So I'm a member of the Google User Experience team, and we are the people who design the apps that many of you will be familiar with, Google Maps, Google Search, and so on. I've been in my job for over 10 years now, and today I want to give you a bit of a glimpse behind the scenes. How do we decide on the features we want to build? How do we get inspiration for what to design for? And then most importantly, how do we truly understand our users? And I realize the title here is a bit cryptic. It has to do with a lot of travel and getting to where our users are. We place a lot of emphasis on direct encounters with the people that we design for, and it takes quite a bit of empathy. Now, I understand that many of you are working on product as well. You might be marketers, designers, product managers. So many of the challenges we face on our journey will likely be very familiar with you. And I hope that some of the solutions we found will resonate, and you can carry those over to your organizations as well. Before I get started, I want to give you a bit of an insight into where I'm coming from, what shaped my perspective. So a bit of a detour, so you know who you're speaking to. I grew up in the south of Germany in a small village in the Black Forest. It's very pretty there, as you can see, a lot of trees, but not terribly exciting. So as soon as I could, I moved to Berlin. This was after high school. The wall just had come down, and Berlin had become a bit of a magnet for creatives, for artists, and a great place for experimentation. So I decided to enroll in art school and had a couple of really exciting formative years. But in the late 90s, also the internet took off, and I became excited by engineering and computer science. So I moved to London for a PhD in computer science. Now, with that background, it's not hugely surprising that I ended up in Silicon Valley, at the time at a small startup called Google. And my background really gave me different perspectives. So I'm familiar with small village and big city life, Germany, UK, and the US. But most importantly, I have one foot in art and design and the other foot in engineering. And that gives me a lot of empathy with our colleagues in both these fields, and we work very tightly together. Enough about me. I want to give you a bit of an insight into Google's journey as well. You might know this already. Google was founded about 20 years ago in '98 by two PhD students at Stanford in Silicon Valley, Larry and Sergey. And this is how our first headquarters looked like, the proverbial Silicon Valley garage. This particular garage is actually Susan Wojcicki's garage. She's still with Google. She now runs YouTube. As you can see, not a lot of money went into our surroundings, pretty humble. But there was a focus from the very early days on engineering excellence. So there was a huge focus on speed and reliability. Not much went into the interior design. Now, what might be less well known is that there was a huge focus on the user and understanding our users as well. What you see here is the first entry in our founding charter, 10 things we know to be true. And that's not just an empty statement. It is really what drove the early founding team when they worked together. For example, the focus on speed is really so that Google can get out of the way as quickly as possible so that users can find the information that they need. Similarly, if you think about the simple white homepage with the single search box, that is really to remove clutter and to make it as simple as possible for people to find what they need to find. This also meant that there was an early focus on getting face-to-face and having direct interactions with our users. So Marissa Mayer, who was one of the first engineers at Google, she told me the story that in the early days, when it was really just a few people in Google, they would gather once a week in some basement in Stanford and test the latest prototypes, the latest search result pages with other students on directly face-to-face. So everybody had a hand in usability. Everybody had a mission to understand the users and optimizing for them. So if you look at our DNA, it's really something that carries through from the very early days to today. This all translated then into a considerable investment in usability labs. And what you see here is how the usability labs looked in 2006 when I joined the company. Simulated office environment, desktop computers, no windows, fake plant in the corner. This is really where I spent a lot of hours in my early days in the company. And it's important because we can optimize and make sure we don't have those clamping app experiences as much as we can. Sometimes something slips too. But it's really something that the company focused on from the very, very early days. The problem, though, is we only tested our products pretty late in the stage, pretty late before launch, and also we tested mostly with people in Silicon Valley who were quite similar to us because we had these labs in our offices. So if you look at this super simplified product development graph, most of our energy was focused here at the end. we had very limited bandwidth to really shape product strategy or product roadmap from the beginning. Now let's fast forward to 2009. That is when I started leading user research for Google Maps. And the first project that landed in my lab was optimizing driving directions, or directions and wayfinding on Google Maps. Now you have to think back. This is 2009. We were still using printouts and paper-based maps at the time. Today, we would be doing this on our phones, of course. At the time, we wanted to optimize how wayfinding functions on desktop maps. And this is an example of how our UI looked in 2009 in India. Now, if you even spend just a few seconds looking at this, you do not need to be an expert to realize that this is not ideal. I mean, for starters, there's no street names. So clearly, a lot of room for improvement. Now, we had all these amazing usability labs, but it somehow felt wrong to study wayfinding while you're seated in a lab in Silicon Valley. So what we did instead is we took our team out to the streets of North America, Europe, as well as Asia, and we took everybody. We took not just the user researchers and the designers, we took the product managers and the engineers. So the entire team collaboratively took these trips. What you see here is a team trip to India. We had a ton of insights, and then we came back. And this is how Google Maps looked shortly after. Obviously, we added street names. However, they are not as useful as you might think. Because if you think about how you are giving directions to someone in the street, you might say, hey, go down here towards the church and then turn right at the tram stop. You're using landmarks, and you're using landmarks to give direction as well as to confirm. So the landmarks that we have added, and you see them in the small font here, are there to really make it easier and simpler for people to navigate, even if they don't know street names, if there's no signs, or if they're obscured. Of course, today this is a historic project, but it did give us a taster for the power of these collaborative immersion trips. And we've done many, many of these trips since. And here's another snapshot from a recent trip. We took again, the entire product team, but this time we also took our leadership team to India and had them dropped in the various mega cities in India, and we had them navigate on foot, by rickshaw, with mopeds, with cars. They used Google Maps, they used local apps, and some of them actually got lost, but that was all very instructive because that gave them the insight and the energy to build better product. They came back, and it was well-timed such that this was part of our annual roadmap planning cycle, so all the fresh insights made it into our strategy discussions. And here's some examples of what came from this. So on the left side, we have the new feature, two-wheeler directions, which is directions optimized for mopeds and rickshaws and two-wheelers because they can take routes that cars can't take. And that is a huge bonus if you're in a big, very busy city. We can now route you optimized for the type of vehicle that you're using. Or if your car is clamped, that might be another alternative. It's something we identified as a need in India, but then we rolled it out globally because it's, of course, useful in other locations as well. What you see on the right side here is Google Go, the search app that's optimized for emerging markets. And again, we built this in close collaboration with our users over many, many cycles. In fact, Google Go, before it was launched, the Search Go app, we built 30 different prototypes before launch and tested those with people, not in labs, but in the streets and in their homes. And we went to Brazil, India, Indonesia, Nigeria, Kenya, Philippines, and Vietnam to get really global insights for these prototypes. Now, if you look at the product, you will first of all see that it's not the simple empty Google homepage, but we have tap targets. And of course, these tap targets make sense when you are typing on a mobile phone, where putting in queries can be quite difficult as you walk. So the tap targets help you to identify what you can do and tap it more quickly. It's also important for users who have low literacy, who might not know how to type, or for people who are new to the internet, who don't know what actually there is that they could be looking for. Of course, the app also is optimized for low bandwidth connections and also uses less data. So again, overall, very much optimized for the needs in emerging markets. One final photo I want to show you here for our various types of direct user engagement. Remember those labs we had without the windows? Well, we've added windows and we put them on wheels. So we now have research vans that we drive out. We do this at the moment only in Silicon Valley, and we do these day trips with our product teams. And again, the idea is to get away from just our office in Silicon Valley and to engage with more diverse communities and get more diverse insight. To be honest, you don't really need a van. You can do that outside your own office. You would be surprised how much diversity you can find even in your local environments if you take the right lens and keep looking at that. It's really to build a culture of direct user insight and direct engagement with people outside our office walls. So coming back to this very simplified product development graph, as I said, at the beginning, we were here at the very end. But now, over the years, we've stretched this, and we are having direct user engagement from the very beginning. And in particular, I added this arrow here, because very often now we find inspiration for new features and new product ideas in these immersion trips, and they then kick off entire new work streams. What makes me really happy, having been part of this journey for about 10 years now, is that while we've seen the change internally in the company, it's really, really nice to see that we are being recognized externally as well. Google for a long time was known as a company that has strong engineering excellence, but last year, 2018, we were also recognized as Design Company of the Year by AIGA as well as Fast Company. So I've given you a pretty fast-paced journey through the evolution of our design culture, or user-centered design culture. I want to pause for a moment because the subtitle here was Creativity Through Empathy, and I want to think a bit more about the things that we're doing and the patterns we found in instilling a user-centered design culture in the company. Before I do this, I first have to make an admission, because I've shown you all the things that we've learned from these immersion trips, from these global field trips. Well, in many, many cases, we had a pretty strong inkling as to what we would be finding already. And we have that inkling from user feedback, from metrics, from surveys, from market research, even our own intuition. So why on earth do we go through all this effort if we know already in broad strokes what we might be finding? And the answer is it has to do with our culture. And one thing that we often internally refer to is Google having a Montessori culture. And it's not only a joking reference, there's quite a bit of truth to this. You might be familiar with Maria Montessori. You might have a child in a Montessori school. She revolutionized education about 100 years ago with a few simple principles. And some of these are peer-driven learning, rather than just learning from the teacher, learning in context rather than just in the classroom, and importantly, learning from your own insights, from your own eureka moments, rather than just learning concepts that have been established by someone else. Now, if you listen to these educational principles and then think about the efforts we're going through in terms of user insights and team immersion, there's a lot of resonance and a lot of similarity here. And I do think this works particularly well at Google because we already have a culture where there's some reluctance to just import best practices. There's a desire to learn from your own failures. There's also a pretty democratic approach to product building. So there's no single head of design at Google who approves all decisions. We have a pretty strong belief in good ideas coming from everywhere. So if we then socialize or democratize this fact-finding, we have a pretty rich, fertile ground to build new ideas and build new products. While your culture in your companies might be slightly different, I do think this is still relevant because it speaks to a pretty fundamental human quality, how we like to learn and how we get the most useful and most lasting insights. I'd like to dwell a bit more on this concept of eureka moments, this spark of joy that then creates energy and momentum. Because sometimes user experience is portrayed as some form of fairy tale profession where people sit in architecturally stunning offices, they're handling colorful Post-its and have one amazing idea after the other. Something like this stock photo here. This is not, from my experience, how eureka moments come about, and is also not how you really build innovation. In fact, the hard truth is that innovation winds past many failed attempts, goes through valleys of doubts, and has many forks with no signposts. So it is a pretty arduous and at times testing process. You go through a lot of prototypes that don't work, and you have to try again. So what gives you the energy to stay the course are these eureka moments, these moments of spark and insight and joy. And we consciously create those eureka moments for our team members because they provide the energy and they create the bonding in addition to the insight, of course. So from my experience, true eureka moments are much more likely to come about in a situation like this, out in the field, in the streets, or in someone's home, very often after a long, hard day, and when the team is already quite exhausted, but then finally the pieces fall into place, and people finally see the forest rather than just the trees. And there's two ingredients that really make a difference. One is participation. Yes, we could give market research reports to our team members, and yes, they could understand them, but the energy that you get from the self-made insights, or the insights that they have had a hand in creating, is so much stronger, and that's why it matters so much. Secondly, empathy. Having a connection with someone who lives in very different conditions, someone you would normally not interact with, but then establish some form of common humanity and understand how your improvements to the product would make a huge difference to their lives. That again is what gives energy, drives momentum, and really gets innovation going in our teams. Now, of course, we can't send people around all the time to be outside the office. We have to do stuff in the office as well and build our products. So we started thinking about how could we get some of that energy and some of that momentum that we get from these direct encounters with people back in the office. And we thought back to the early days when Google was founded, when the founding team did those direct user studies, user tests in the Stanford basement, where everybody, independent of what their function was, took part in these user tests. So what we're doing now is we're inviting about, in one session, 20 people, 20 users, and we ask them to teach back our products to our engineers. And it's a pretty simple approach, but it's extremely powerful. I've done many of these sessions myself, and they've been amongst the most humbling and joyful experiences I've had in my career. Because what happens typically is you get 20 engineers, say, into the room, and there's a lot of doubt. You know, people feel like, oh, is this worth my time? I know my product pretty well. What is this person going to teach me? But then, and as the conversations are happening, the entire mood changes. There's a huge switch. You know, suddenly there's humility. There's a feeling of shattered preconceptions and worldviews changed. And then when we debrief with the team after our guests have left, there's so much energy and so much eagerness to share ideas and insights that then carries the team forward and continues us on the path of innovation, triggered by these direct encounters. It's extremely simple. I highly encourage you to try it out. We've done it now with about 2,000 colleagues, and we continue to run it out across the company. Now, I've spoken a lot about empathy and direct connection with our users. Of course, that's just one part of the coin, right? Google, like any other company, we place a lot of emphasis on metrics, on quantitative data. And that's right, we have to fine-tune our products based on what we learn at scale from our users. Now, one thing, though, that I want to highlight that is very dangerous, potentially, is that it's become so easy to create new metrics that we just count what's easy to count rather than what counts or what matters. And that is where I think the two have to come together. We have to think very, very carefully about what metrics we want to implement, and making those decisions often will require human intuition and direct observation as well. We cannot just take everything from our metrics. And this is truly important because the metrics that you set will really act as the DNA of your company. If you have whatever energy you put into aspirational value statements, if your metrics point in a different direction and the incentives tied to these metrics, you will not get to a user-centered culture. So that's extremely important that we carefully consider what metrics that we set. One example from my own experience, about 5 years ago, I was able to inject a couple of questions in our annual Google Guys survey. That's an annual full survey of all our colleagues, all our employees. And it was only about 5 questions. They were tied to our perception of product quality and user-centered culture. Those 5 questions are still being tracked every single year now, and our top management looks at the results very carefully. And they have been so useful as levers of creating action and changing practices. It's really been quite amazing to watch. And it's a very simple intervention that continues to have massive impact. I'll give you one example for one thing that came out of this recently. I mentioned before that amongst the design principles that we have is simple design, intuitive design. And we all adhere to these design principles, but we never actually put the effort in to define what we mean by this. So we had a situation where everyone said, oh yeah, I'm doing simple design, I'm doing intuitive design, but let's say marketing had a different idea from product design, from engineering. So what we are doing now is we are teaching these principles to everybody who joins the product team, no matter their function or their specialty. So everyone aligns on a shared definition of what we mean by let's say, by simple design. The other thing we've done is we've worked with our HR team, and these have also been incorporated in our promotion criteria. So if you want to get promoted in this company, you have to show that your work is in service of these product excellence principles. And again, it's a pretty big intervention that was triggered by small injections of metrics in our annual survey. This brings me to my last slide. I think this quote by Peter Drucker really nicely sums up what I've learned in over 10 years in product development and user experience at Google. Our technologies are changing all the time. Now, at the moment, it's multimodal, it's conversation design, it's AI. But what remains constant is our DNA, our root in user focus. We just have to reinterpret it for every single stage of our journey. For Google, this has meant that we are placing huge emphasis on direct user interaction in big and small ways. It has also meant carefully selecting the metrics that we want to optimize for, and then ultimately aligning on a few simple principles. If we wouldn't value that direct user interaction, we would not have taken those field trips that have led to innovations such as two-wheeler directions, such as tab-based navigation in Go, and many, many others. So it's something that is inherent to how we build product. And the story will be different in your companies, but I encourage you to think very carefully about the metrics, the culture, and the principles you align on, because they will truly determine how you build product and what future you're creating in your company and for your users and clients. With that, I'd like to thank you. I'll be here for chats and questions. I'll be in the break. I'll be up there at the door. So if you want to chat more, happy to do that. You can also stay in touch with me via LinkedIn or Twitter. So please do get in touch. It's been a joy being here today. Thank you.